Want a chance to win a Spring Creek Model Train's 25th anniversary car? Sign up for their newsletter before December 15th for your chance to win each week. The Spring Creek Model Train's newsletter includes new product announcements, pre-order information, specials, coupons, and more. With drawings held each week, the sooner you sign up, the more chances you have to win. Head to the bottom of the homepage at springcreekmodeltrains.com and sign up for your chance to win. Fast forward into the future or bring a touch of the past to your layout with Rapido GP20 tank cars from Home Shops. Deliver clean and safe water to areas in critical need, just like the prototype with water-trained tank cars. These models represent a new, innovative solution to help solve water shortages across North America. Also available from Home Shops, Gargle Oil GP20 tank cars. This industry was a cornerstone of Frank Ellison's Delta lines, and these cars feature a classic 1970s look that pays tribute to the legacy of this inspiring freelance layout. Learn more about these cars and see the entire Home Shops catalog at homeshops.net. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. It's time to talk freelance model railroading, and there's probably no better guy on the planet to talk to about freelance railroading than Mr. Home Shops himself, Mr. Chris Palmieri. Chris, great seeing you again, my friend.
Yeah, great to be here, Ray. I appreciate the invite. It seems like we're seeing a lot of each other lately.
It seems so. I mean, we just about a week ago, in fact, actually, I think it was exactly a week ago, you and I had dinner in Fort Worth and got to hang out just outside the shadow of the Texas Motor Speedway and got to talk for, it was a little while. It was about, 4 hours or so?
Something like that. There's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, we had a lot to talk about. We had a lot of fun chatting and sharing ideas and hearing about freelance railroads, and I got to talk about the podcast and a whole bunch of other things in between. Had a great time there, but that wasn't the first time I had seen you in a while because I just saw you in Colorado too for the Colorado Rail Proto Meet. And of course, the Freelance Forum was out there too.
Yes, sir. And thank you for showing up for that as well. I know you've done quite a bit of traveling lately, but wow, what an exciting event that was. So many freelance modelers from all over showed up for that. It was kind of humbling, but really exciting to get that community, the online community that we have developed actually in one place at one time. For those that could make it, it was a great event.
Well, credit where credit's due, because I honestly didn't have plans to go until you messaged me and said you really need to get to Colorado. And I'm glad that you did, because then I started putting plans together and was able to put that all into an action plan and got myself out to Colorado. And I'm glad I didn't miss it, because it really was. It was awesome to see at a Rail Proto Meet, a freelance event that fit in so well. And your clinics were so well attended along with the others. And I think there was a lot of prototype people in there sitting, listening as well. So it was a good spread and a good mix of folks.
Oh, yeah. There were lots of prototype folks enjoying what we had to display. You know, there were lots of comments about how many freelance models were on display there. And I would say, I don't know, maybe 75% of the models that were displayed were freelance from folks all around. So folks really got to see what this is all about, and that the modeling, just because it's freelance, it's quality modeling with a lot of thought. And it's, you know, every one of those pieces of equipment is a work of art to behold. And it was great to have it all displayed at that location.
Yeah, it definitely fit in well. And I was able to walk down through the tables, and it's always great when the person who created the model is there, because then you get to ask them a whole bunch of questions. I think that's really part of the magic of any RPM, when you can get in front of that modeler and just start asking those questions and get that one-on-one information from them, whether it's a prototype or a freelance railroader.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, there's a lot of us in this community that have online personas or pseudonames or what have you. And, you know, there were road owners walking right by each other that didn't recognize each other in person because they hadn't met that way. In fact, one fella flew up from Texas, John Haney. He's got that C&O Piney Creek subdivision model railroad. and he actually printed up the cover shot from his Facebook page and had it on display next to the equipment he brought up, so that people would make the connection. Okay, I've seen this guy in my feed a million times as this ID. Well, here's his stuff here. And, oftentimes our Facebook presence becomes our identity, and the event itself actually put more human contact or human ID with the folks behind the art that is freelance model railroading.
Yeah, that's definitely for sure. And that is kind of a funny thought. Will be talking a little bit later as we dive into this freelance topic about having your railroad be believable to a point where people are looking for it. But how about when your freelance railroad becomes more popular than your own name?
Yeah, for sure. And, that's some of our own branding techniques, how we portray it. But people certainly, before I started Home Shops, knew my Texas and Great Northern from those posts under the ID of Texas and Great Northern, and they may not have known that it was me behind it. And in fact, it wasn't until after a while that Home Shops got started. A lot of folks didn't know that it was me behind it, and they knew my modeling and they had heard of Home Shops, but it wasn't until they connected the dots and realized that it was me behind it because of the identity behind, or the identity branding of the entity. It gets separated from the person behind it. So these events in person are just really big as far as bringing the community together and putting the human touch on the concepts that we all enjoy every day.
Well, inspired by all of the events that happened at the Colorado Rail Proto Meet and all the great folks I got to meet in the freelance forum, I wanted to bring you on to talk about freelance and go right back to the beginning. Now, you want to talk about right back to the beginning? I looked it up. The first time you were on Around the Layout podcast, we have to go back to episode 15. Tonight, we are recording episode 195. We were going back to episode 15, September 27th, 2022. We got to hear the story of the Meridian Speedway. And I want to have you on tonight to be able to talk about how to get started in freelance model railroading. It seems like a new world for some folks, but getting that understanding of what is freelance, and we're going to talk about that and the advantages of it, and then give you some steps to follow to get your story started. So looking forward to diving into that with you, Chris.
For sure. I'll let you lead the way with the questions.
So let's start with defining freelance. Let's talk about what is freelance railroading. How do you define freelance railroading?
My favorite way to explain freelance model railroading is to compare model railroading as an art like painting. And you have prototype model railroaders, and I associate that with like artists who trace or paint realistic scenes. It's art, it's enjoyable, and if the emphasis is on getting every detail exactly like it is, that's prototype, that's tracing. Then there's freelance, which is a broad spectrum of what is not exactly like it is in the real world. And John Parker did a great clinic, and he created a spectrum of freelance and not freelance. And as he would talk about his different concepts, he would have this slide or this icon on his slides of this spectrum between proto freelance and freelance. And it appears differently based on the eye of the beholder. Something might seem really believable to me, and it might seem kind of, man, that's not so believable to you. But going back to the painting analogy, if somebody has an impressionist type painting or is creating a scene from scratch based on the imagination, well, that's completely freelance in the world of painting, like a Picasso. The same thing in model railroading. So you can't go trackside and see an Alabama Central CF7, but you can certainly go to Radisson McGuire's Facebook page and enjoy the art that is his CF7 and, imagine what that world would be like where it really existed.
Yeah, that's a great analogy of painting and thinking of art. And like you said, it's all in the eyes of the beholder, isn't it? And trying to determine what is your taste and how much of it is really your taste.
For sure. And, some folks have asked me to define or peg exactly where on that spectrum my own Meridian Speedway is. And I can't define how others perceive it. But what I do like, or what I do strive for, is to create a vision and experience so that folks who look at it, I want them to come away with, wow. I want them to come away with, this is something I'd like to learn more about. And I'd like them to come away with an experience that makes them feel like this could be something that really exists in the real world, even though it is not. And, and then I will let the viewer decide for themselves how close to prototype they want to put it, or how close to freelance they want to put it on that spectrum or that range of the two.
Let's talk about considering freelance. And as somebody looks at it and says, I don't know if I want to really stay heavy to the prototype, if I want to create something of my own. Let's talk about some of the benefits of freelance railroading and what it allows for you to do as a modeler.
Well, it opens up a lot of freedom, but it also creates a whole new discipline. You have to now create something that's believable. But one of the benefits for me personally is, as a railroader, and I noticed a lot of freelance model railroaders also have some tie to the railroad industry. It lets you remove the railroad itself from what you're bringing into your house. And that's definitely a benefit. I don't want to bring everything about work into my house and enjoy it, but I want to remember what I like about railroading. And we're able to pick and choose the components of that and mold it into something that's enjoyable at the house, without bringing home all the drama and stress of work. And we all have picked up on something, usually in our formative years or teen years when we first got exposed to railroading, that we really enjoyed. There's something that really drew us to it. And for some folks, it is just prototype. I want to remember exactly that. But in other cases, it's a feeling or an idea, or, hey, I saw this and that would be cool if it did this. And we get to write those stories and be creative as freelancers, whereas a prototype modeler doesn't get to be as creative.
We interviewed Michael Gross a bit back, and this thought that he presented during his interview sticks with me and comes to mind as you talked about, bringing the railroad home and things that you don't want to do. And he mentioned, art is a form of protest. And it sounds like maybe freelance might be a little bit of protest as well.
There may very well be a little bit of that. Yeah, for sure.
So we talk about when we're a prototype model railroader, there's certain boundaries that we can't cross over, sacrifices we have to make. Talk about how freelance kind of affects that as you start to maybe tip down the spectrum away from the fully prototype mindset, and even start to sprinkle the idea of freelance into things.
So, if I'm a Santa Fe modeler and I'm going to pick a year and I'm going to pick a location, perhaps everything has to fit that exact narrative to the exactly in this year in 1995. Where was the horn and the headlights located on the Santa Fe 2912, right? And that can be fun for some, but it can also become tedious. So sprinkling in, all right, the Texas and Great Northern 268 is a GP30. It may be loosely modeled on what would have been if the locomotive was bought from the Santa Fe. But you get to take away all of the scrutiny and demand to get every rivet just right. And instead, we ran these GP38s on John Parker's layout, and the comments of this 5-unit set of GP30s in Texas and Great Northern paint scheme running across that layout was, wow, this is great. Nobody dug into that GP38. If it was the Santa Fe 2770, right, it would have had this here just a little bit differently, right? So it gives you the freedom to create the scene and the experience and let you delve into either you think that's cool or maybe you don't, but it takes away all of that exactness that's demanded by the prototype side of the hobby.
So I can imagine that for freelance, it takes away from maybe that prototype box that you get put into by having all of those boundaries. You can blow out those boundaries, and you can also find and express an artistic side of yourself and be able to create things that you wouldn't be able to with the prototype, including names, including logos, including paint scheme. It just seems like there's just so many awesome opportunities just to rewrite the entire rule book on that side of things.
Absolutely. And you can laser focus on whatever aspect you want, but you're making it your own. So you can be as simple or as complex as you want, developing the roster, developing the system map, developing the network of traffic flows, developing the color scheme, developing the name of the railroad, and even a slogan or a motto, all these things puts you as part of the identity because you create it.
Kind of tickling both the artist side and the entrepreneurial side as well, isn't it?
Yeah, tell me about it. Absolutely. And it really is. You are writing your own business plan. You may not be doing it in that structured way of a business plan, but you're creating the blueprint for a business that may or may not ever exist. If you do turn it into a model road where you're selling your products, there is a business line there, but the traits of an entrepreneur are similar to those who are freelance model railroaders.
Let's talk about beginning to build that freelance story. If you've decided, yeah, all these benefits seem to be, and I want to be part of the cool kids club that is the freelance model railroaders, right? And be able to participate more in that event in Colorado and be able to have something that's uniquely your own, right? That
Mm-hmm.
kind of feeling to it. Let's start by asking, what are some of the first steps as you start to consider freelance that you should be kind of jotting down on a piece of paper?
Well, your first step should be deciding why it is you're not satisfied with the prototype piece. Get your head wrapped around what is it that's just not satisfying with the prototype piece. And that could be that, again, you don't want to bring it home with you if it's something you've had other experiences with. It could be that you look outside and there's just not that much variety of equipment anymore. You're going to get, if you're modeling current day, you've only got a handful of Gevos you can get. So maybe it's that, but identify what it is that you're dissatisfied with, or that isn't leaving your hobby satiated with prototype model railroading. And then you want to define, well, how do we fill that void? What is it? And always go back to what drew you to model railroading in the first place and try and start to connect the dots. I had this experience here on this railroad when I was younger, and I really like that about that I really enjoy those memories. So pull from that inspiration and then start to think about what you want it to look like. And it's a creative process. And you start there and let your imagination and creativity take you in whichever direction it goes. But write down, document along the way your thoughts, and so you've got something to look at and reference as you develop your model railroad.
Let's talk about some examples of the levels of freelance as one gets started and making that decision. Because I think you make a great point about looking at prototypes and making a decision as to what you don't like about them. And it may be a lot of things, or it might be a little bit. And maybe you don't have to completely tear the cover off the book. Maybe you just have to rewrite it a little bit. Let's talk about some examples of freelance railroads or proto freelance railroads that we know of, and different levels of that proto to freelance spectrum. Let's start with one that we know very well, and I think is a really good example of not completely ripping the book off the cover, but still making it his own. That's John Parker's BNSF Fall River Division.
For sure. John Parker's stunning railroad is one that makes folks do a double take, right? You walk in that amazing atmosphere that he has created, that environment he's created, and it feels like the BNSF. But there is no BNSF Fall River division. So it is proto freelance, more on the proto side of that spectrum, but it's definitely not a specific place on the BNSF. So what is your takeaway from that is you don't have to reinvent everything. You just have to decide, okay, the place, the location is what I'm going to make freelance. I don't want to be a specific place where the BNSF went, but I want to create that feeling like it's the BNSF. So he was liberated from, all right, this tunnel portal isn't there, or this store is on the wrong side of the track, or this curve and this switching lead is on the wrong side, right? He was liberated from that. And he was able to create the BNSF in his space, and he let it tell his story.
I'd say one of the things he was also liberated from was having to create a paint scheme. He didn't have to
Mm-hmm.
figure out a logo. He didn't have to figure out a name other than the location name. And that freed him up for what he needed to do and what his passion was, which is that amazing detailing and building this massive mushroom layout in his basement. he was freed up from having to get the paint booth out and start putting masking tape on undecorated shells. He had the foundation to build off of.
Absolutely. And, that was enough for him. That satisfied his need to have his hand in the creativity of the art that he was creating. For other folks, they may want to have a little bit more of a hand in shaping what people get to see.
Now let's talk about a challenge of that. Would you say that by having that real Class 1 railroad led to a little bit more of a challenge of plausibility, where he really needed to sell the aspect of the Fall River division and make it feel more realistic?
If John weren't as amazing of a modeler as he would, he might have had to have created that. But with the just the wow, stunning factor of everything he's done, I think he can sell whatever he puts out there as plausible. But for some folks, it would be challenging because your eye sees the Union Pacific or the NS or whatever it is. If we're close to the prototype end of that spectrum, and then you start wanting to see biased because of what you would expect to see if you're a trackside, right? And John was able to pull that off. Nobody that I know of, and certainly not myself, when I experience his road, thinks this isn't what the BNSF would do if this were, or this isn't how it would look. So he did that very well.
Let's push the slider all the way up to the freelance side of things. Let's talk about an example of someone who's gone the complete freelance route.
100% freelance, that reminds me of Frank Ellison and the Delta Lines. And he is a fellow that we have talked about and we've done a number of projects for. But he really started with a concept that was not only freelance, but it was freelance and location non-specific. The stations of Colbert and Fillmore, the iconic locations on his model railroad that were written about in the 1930s, 40s, 50s extensively, those weren't real places. They were actually street names from the Lakeview neighborhood in New Orleans, where he built his railroad, Colbert, Fillmore, those places, those streets. But he was able to build this vision of this could be a real railroad. And he made it act and breathe and sound like a railroad with industries that had very real operating structures. These cars got pulled and spotted off of these trains and interchanged here and classified here with an operating schedule. But there was no Delta Lines, and not only was the railroad fake, the locations are all fake as well.
And then there's another name that obviously has inspired so many freelance railroads, inspired really railroaders of both the prototype and freelance, and that's Alan McClellan's Virginia and Ohio. Let's talk a little bit about that and what made that railroad so special.
Well, I think the two things made the V&O very special, besides the fact that everybody had exposure to it because it was written about extensively in the model railroad press in the 70s and 80s. Number one, it was linked to other model railroads, to other freelance model railroads. You had that connection with Tony Kester's Allegheny Midland and Steve King's Virginia Midland. And just like Chessie System was formed from its predecessor railroads, B&O and C&O, and it kind of followed that template. But what it showed folks was freelance model railroaders can also interact with each other, just like prototype railroads interact with each other. Allen had a very defined sense of purpose for his railroad. This is an Appalachian railroad that also served the industrial areas of Ohio. And he very religiously followed that theme, that script, so that every photograph, every operating session he had, you felt like you were on this railroad that was in this part of America, and it just seemed to fit. So there was the plausibility from the standpoint of his story was well thought out and disciplined. And then that combined with the networking with the other railroads that it associated with just made it a fascinating story for a lot of folks. And, a person can't help but read, in the 70s and 80s, these articles about it and imagine, well, what if my railroad also could connect with this empire, right? If these men could connect, why not have something else? So it became more inclusive. It became more attainable that, folks could be part of something larger.
Whether it be John Parker's BNSF Fall River Division that mentioned the V&O and the Delta Lines, all three seem to have something very much in common. And that's the believable story, the plausibility. Talk about plausibility as one starts to create their freelance story and the importance of being able to sell that story.
Well, you have to think to yourself, why would this railroad exist? Every switch costs the railroad money. Every locomotive costs money. Every employee costs money. And, if we're pulling superliner passenger cars with an SD60, for no reason, that's not plausible. But if the commodities in the traffic base match where you have put this railroad, and based on the size of your railroad, whether it's just the smallest of short lines to a regional to a class one, you make the roster and the traffic flows and the scenes fit that, you're on your way.
So to me, it sounds like there is a difference between what would maybe considered good freelance and total fantasy.
Yeah, I kind of like to shy away from the term fantasy, but freelance to me is it's art. It's creating a story and it's making an experience believable. Fantasy, Athearn has branded fantasy with some of their schemes where they're taking, the Black Widow scheme of the Southern Pacific that disappeared many, many years ago and just plopping it on a modern locomotive. And what they haven't done is created the freelance storyline that would explain why that still exists. So that's just fantasy. Here it is, imagine it, make up your own story as you wish, or just like it and put it on the shelf. That's more the fantasy concept. Whereas the freelance piece is, we're also going to create the story so that you can immerse yourself in, here's why I'm looking at what I'm looking at.
But if one were to want to take the what if story, say a railroad, a fallen flag that, they want to create the what if and take art as a form of protest and protest the fact that that flag did fall, there could be plausibility to that if done correctly.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, any piece of fantasy you can make plausible with a little creativity and a little due diligence, for sure. With the Texas and Great Northern, my freelance railroads, I improvised the paint scheme from the fallen flag of Georgia Pacific short lines, like the Ashley Drew Northern, Gloucester Southern, Fordyce, and Princeton. And I feel like reaching back into history, that paint scheme is no longer used. Georgia Pacific no longer has railroads, but it creates a little bit extra sense of plausibility because your mind's eye says, I've seen that. It could be right. The story variables could have changed to where that makes sense, and anybody can do that with the history is rich with nuggets of what was that could be developed into a great freelance story.
No, it sounds like to hold that plausibility, a good way to do it is to look back into history and then look at the prototype and see what they're doing and kind of steal. I guess 80% of art is stealing, or maybe that percentage may be higher, but it seems like that may be also the case with freelance, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good point that you bring up, the juxtaposition between what used to exist that no longer does and what is it that exists today that we don't like. And sometimes it's more plausible to change what has disappeared and bring it into what I wish it was today rather than to take what is today and change it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of doing a rewrite of history versus a rewrite of modern common knowledge, right?
Correct. Rewriting modern knowledge is exactly what is the backbone of freelance. There is knowledge to be learned, just like prototype model railroading. Those who freelance best do research. They research the location, they research the railroads that were there, but instead of researching to make an exact replica, they research to have a foundation for a plausible original story.
Let's talk a little bit about selecting location and trying to figure that out and having it plausible. You mentioned the Frank Ellison's Delta lines. He made up using street names, and I know they're also for the Fall River Division. Complete fantasy, like you said. If you're looking for the Fall River Division in the BNSF timetable, keep looking. Maybe you're not going to find it, right?
Right.
It's just not there. Talk about that location and how that's important to building the story and being able to tell it.
Well, the location is probably the most important piece because what the location does, or the importance of selecting the location is that's the most passionate part for most freelance model railroaders, because of a location, a place and time where they had an experience that wowed them with railroading and inspired them to model railroad. The location is the stage for your play, your story. One of the tenets of Frank Ellison's Art of Model Railroading is he compared a great model railroad to a vaudeville theatrical performance where the model railroad itself is the stage and the trains are the actors, and the staging yard is your backstage where all your different sets and props are, and the operating plan is the script. So the setting is very, very vital to having everything else that you put on it seem believable. You wouldn't have a movie or a play with, Eskimos in the middle of the Sahara Desert, right? It just doesn't make sense to have something out of place like that. So it's very important to find the right setting. And for most folks, that goes right back to, again, when they were in their formative period, was discovering railroading. What is a time and place where was your hook? Where did you really decide, wow, what I'm looking at is cool? And you became a lifelong rail fan and move that into being a model railroader. So that setting that created that set of emotion is generally where you want to focus on developing your model railroad, because that's going to be where the most passion.
What I'm hearing you say is the best tool to start figuring out your freelance railroad might be a mirror.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, taking a good look at yourself, understanding the things that you're passionate about, the things you're not passionate about, and then starting to build your story around that.
For sure. I mean, most art is a reflection of the artist. Freelance model railroading, without doubt, is a form of art.
If someone came to you and said, "Hey, I'm really thinking about starting a freelance railroad and I want to learn more about it," what are some of the resources out there? Where would you send them, or what book would you hand them, or what other resources would you give them to start learning more about freelance railroading?
I think I would definitely direct them to Frank Ellison's The Art of Model Railroading, but I would also direct them to social media and the freelance pages that are dedicated to freelance modeling for inspiration. When you get to see what other contemporary modelers are doing, that sets the stage for your thought process. You get to discover in short time a lot of different concepts that you will either like or not like. And as you get to see what folks are doing, you can decide actually relatively quickly, given the amount of content that's out there to sift through, what you like, what you don't like, and how to make it yours.
When I see a model railroad where tracks have been taken up and they've been painted and it leaves that shadow, I jokingly say that's really kind of the mark of a true model railroader, that you can tell that things have been moving. And I kind of think that could also happen with someone's story as well, right? Where their story starts a certain way, but as it starts to develop, as you start to get into it, that story may change a bit too. And that sounds like it may be a natural part of the process.
Oh, for sure. I mean, storytelling, how many stories out there, novels have volume one, two, three, four, sequels and trilogies. And that's what makes it interesting. But instead of it being the story is changing as per the exact pages of history, the story is changing as I write it. And, once the beauty of it is you don't have to discover and perfect everything all at once. You get to pick and choose the aspects that interest you at the moment, develop them. And as you start to put those pieces together, the paint scheme, the location, this is what this train's going to look like. Is it track worn? Is it CTC? As you start to put the pieces together, the vision becomes clearer as to what the next step is for most folks who are into it. And you go down the path, you think that this is where you want it to go, what you want it to look like, and you take a step back and think, no, I should have taken a left there in my thought process instead of a right, right? And then you get to scrub the board and do it all over again, as do most artists.
Let's get into branding the freelance, and as you start to create the story and the things that you also get to create in the artistic side of things. One, let's talk about a name, because there's always, a good power in a name. Got to have a good name. Talk about choosing a good name for a railroad and inspiration for that.
For sure. This is a great starting point for going down that creative path. It's a great connection that requires some prototype knowledge and research. Railroad names historically follow a pattern, and generally that pattern is location and direction. Kansas City Southern, Great Northern, Western Pacific. Very few railroads are, the Ray are not central, right? But so
Yeah,
if
nobody names their railroad that. No, not even Ray Arnott names his railroad that. But yeah,
right,
yeah.
so kind of look at railroad names. Thumb through one of my favorite reference books is the official Railway Equipment Register. Because it's good for both understanding freight car rosters, but it's also got every railroad's name in there. And kind of thumb through there and get a feel for, all right, if my railroad is this and it's here, what makes sense? And the, the overwhelming boilerplate that railroads in this country have used is a combination of locations and or direction. So if you're naming your railroad after 2 points on your railroad in a direction or something like that, the mind's eye of the viewer will think, okay, this sounds like a railroad. But if it's you know you know you know instead of TWA Airlines, it's Trans World Railroad, right? That has less of a believable feel to it because it sounds like an airline.
Yeah, unlike Pan Am,
I
right?
was I almost brought that up. That's when you freelance in 12-inch to the foot scale.
Yeah, for sure. When you have a name, now it's talking about a logo, and I'm a closet graphic design guy, like kind of very amateur. I make real graphic designers cringe with my work and how I do it, but it's a lot of fun to bring out that creative side and be able to do that. Let's talk about logo design and what makes a good logo and the inspiration you can find to create awesome logos.
Well, there's certainly no shortage of reference material for real railroad logos. And an overwhelming theme is simplicity in terms of color palette, and depending on the era, simplicity in terms of just the basic graphic design. I've seen some freelance I've seen some freelance logos where, you can tell the mindset is what are the graphics available to my printer today? And, things that we can print up that have, 15 different colors in it and incredible complexity and detail are just not what railroads would put on the side of their equipment. You look at how simple the BN logo is, an artistic B with the N inside of it. And that's it. And how iconic was that? And it's also, you want to take away some of your experiences. A formative experience for me when I was very young. We got to my family was involved in the Southeast Louisiana chapter of the NRHS, and they sponsored the Southern Railway's Deep South steam excursions. Right, I don't remember much when I was that young, but I remember vividly we had ridden a northbound train, and they turned the train around in the coal plant, the utility at Richburg, Mississippi, and I'm standing here on the Lookout Mountain, this open platform car that was the rear car of the steam excursion, and a Southern Railroad GP38 had tacked on. And I'm standing here on the platform as a young kid just staring at this Jeep 38 dragging us around the loop in this power plant. And I'm looking at that yellow Southern logo on the nose of that engine. I mean, it's so close I can touch it. It's like, trackside, there's these magical locomotives and things, and you stand back and clear and see them from a distance. And here's this thing right there. I can reach out practically and touch it. And I haven't forgotten that. And of course, that logo is on all of the Southern passenger cars. So if you look at the round yellow Texas and Great Northern logo, it doesn't look like the Southern Railway. It doesn't have the stylized letters in it just like that. But it was that memory of that experience where I thought that was just the coolest thing. This Southern locomotive is dragging us through a coal plant, and it's right there. That I never forgot, and I wanted to incorporate that in my logo. And I think I pulled off the mix to where it's believable. It brings that memory back for me. A lot of folks haven't had that experience with the Southern, but that railroad disappeared now in 1981. But it has that same feel for this. This could have been a railroad logo at the time.
I'll tell you, if you're into Easter eggs or even subtle hints or those kinds of things, it seems like Freelance is the way to go, just like you've done with your Texas and Great Northern logo and, having some special meaning to you. But if you want to hide stuff and kind of do those neat little, like I mentioned, Easter egg things, boy, it seems like it's something you could do with a Freelance.
Oh, for sure. Any memory, any experience, anything you stumble upon, you can grab those elements that really reach out to you and then incorporate them in your story.
That's really kind of that why in the mirror, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Now we have a name. We've talked about a logo. Let's talk about motive power and let's talk about rolling stock and kind of making those choices to help sell the plausibility. Let's talk about first choosing your locomotives and choosing something that would be believable for the railroad you're building.
Well, obviously, era is an important factor in that. So, you if your railroad is something that would be of the financial status where it would be buying new locomotives, then you're going to look at what was being built around the time that your railroad would have developed into the time that you're modeling. For example, if you're going to model 1996, well, you wouldn't be putting all locomotives on there that were built in 1996, but what would still be running around, what would that railroad have purchased over the last 20 years, 10 years? And then your story, is your story something that involves rolling real railroads into your railroad? Did it acquire this part of the Illinois Central, right? And if, as part of that acquisition, would it have made sense to have GP10s from the IC or SD20s rolled into it? Would locomotives have come with the purchase that yielded the creation of your railroad? And then you want to look at your traffic structure. How many trains a day does the railroad really run? And that will dictate how many engines you're going to need, and that'll help you structure your roster. And how many road units do I need that are high horsepower? How many low horsepower units do I need for yard service? And you just kind of plug in what was available at the time and have fun with it.
For one, I'm really enjoying seeing some of these freelance railroads that have been done with the short line mentality because it just seems like the creativity spills out. You mentioned earlier on Radisson McGuire and the Alabama Central and, even Greg McComas and the Michigan Interstate and some of the creativity there, a mix of roster components. The short lines kind of took what they could get and what they could afford. And it kind of makes for a neat mix. And they're ratty. They're not brand new. They've got character. Those are all things that you can start to tell through your story with your locomotives.
Character is a really good word for it, and I think for folks who do, there's a lot to be said for picking a small railroad, a short line. A, why bite off more than you can chew? B, you get to own more of the little details. And C, smaller railroads just have more of a family feel to them, a more welcoming feel. And you want to create something that doesn't, it's not the hostile environment of a class one hump yard. It's the welcoming environment of a scrappy little railroad that's looking to earn business, and that has a whole different feel to it. That's just a lot of fun to recreate in your vision, in line with your vision.
Let's talk about rolling stock and when you decide that your freelance railroad is actually going to own some rolling stock or have their logos on rolling stock and kind of the decisions that are made there.
Well, again, era and location is important, and of course, commodity is important. And I say era because if you're in the per diem era, you may have, it may be my Coaster Tags Farland terminal with, just a handful of locomotives and a short amount of track. But if you're playing the per diem game, you're going to be in business building a boxcar fleet that's going to go all over the country to earn revenue that way. So, just kind of have in mind what the purpose of your railroad is, but what other things might be going on and what kind of pool services might you have? Is it a small Appalachian short line, but it serves a appliance factory, and there's this pool of cars like Tom Patterson's Chesapeake, Wheeling, and Erie. We did the appliance box car for it. And the concept was his fleet of 30 cars was just a small component of a 300 car fleet that the NW and the VNO and the chassis system had, to serve that. So what kind of customers do you have? What's the era, and what are you wanting to do? And then plug in cars that make sense. And not every car has to make 100% sense. I see folks who are like, well, I've only got this one industry and we're just going to have this car. And if you go through that official railway equipment register and start looking at the freight car fleets of short lines, you'll be surprised how many short lines that you've almost never heard of have 10 pages worth of cars in the equipment register. The Sabine River and Northern has page after page after page of box cars with different variants. Some railroads, very laser focused, this is my one commodity, and all the cars are revolved around it. And you turn the page, and here's another railroad, which is also very small, but they've got freight cars all over the place. So you can almost write any story to explain why you put a specific car type into your roster if it appeals to you.
Tonight, we only laid just a very thin coat of primer on the freelance world, and there's just so much more to it. If someone were fired up right now and say, you know what, I'm really thinking about making the change or starting a freelance railroad, where would one head for some good inspiration on freelance?
Again, I would direct you to social media. There's a Facebook page that's just called Freelance Model Railroading. There's one that's called Freelance Model Railroading in a Prototype World, and take a look there. And then I would also go to eBay. If you don't have the RMCs, from the 70s and 80s, just search for VNO articles in Allegheny Midland articles and Utah Belt articles. Very, very inspirational. And just kind of thumb through those pages. And what's really important when you look at magazines and you look at Facebook posts, while the VNO was very well developed as a model railroad, the model railroader can create the impression, the illusion of a larger railroad through just a few select really great scenes and images. And just think about, as you look through a magazine article that has 6 images in it, 5 images in it, whatever it is, you come away from that thinking, this is a much larger railroad than it really is. And, use that as inspiration. When I take 5 photographs of what I'm going to create, what do I want that to look like? And just focus on that. Don't focus on, I've got to do something that's got to be a basement full of perfection, because that can be very, very discouraging.
I also know of a website that also has a list of freelance railroads on it as well that you could draw inspiration from. Am I correct in saying that?
There surely is. You must be referring to one of our freelance forum announcements. So on homeshops.net, our website, we created something called the Freelance Hub, and we launched it, made it live at the Freelance Forum in Greeley this year. And what that is, it's a resource. We reached out to all of the railroads that we've produced cars for and asked them for kind of a boilerplate list of things that we could post and have basically a resource where you could learn about these railroads. And there's certainly a lot more that we can do, but I think we've got about 60 pages on board where, you don't have to be a member of Facebook or Instagram or these places to learn about these railroads. We wanted something in-house that folks can go to and learn about the railroads. And there's certainly inspiration. As you peruse those pages, you'll see things you like, you'll see things you don't like, and you'll also see some cars available. By all means, grab some of those. And once you've got a piece of freelance equipment and it's on your desk, or you see it in person, the creativity and the inspiration, it just flows from there.
And of course, the links to homeshops.net and all these other things that we've mentioned tonight will be on our website, aroundthelayout.com/195. Well, Chris, it's time to listen to the answers submitted by our listeners for the question of the month. Those folks went to aroundthelayout.com/question and hit record and submitted their answer to the question of the month. And that question of the month was, what is the name of your freelance railroad and why? Or if you were to create a freelance railroad, what would you name it and why? Asked them to tell us the name and why they chose it in 90 seconds or less, and we had 7 great answers to the question of the month. We're going to take a listen to them right now. And the first one comes from a guy who has a secret name, and we can't guess it, but he is our resident expert Z-scaler. C says himself. Here he comes.
Hello, everyone. This is Chris, also known as Scott, or C says. My freelance railroad is called the Illinois Midland. Illinois Midland serves central Illinois, including the major cities of Peoria, Decatur, Bloomington, Springfield, and East St. Louis. The logo is based off of the Illinois Terminal logo from their later era before they were merged into Norfolk and Western.
Well, thank you, Chris, or whatever your name is, for your answer. And yeah, Illinois Midland, what a great sounding name. That sounds pretty plausible to me. How about you, Chris?
Well, for sure. It follows the that mantra of location and direction, right? It's a great name for a railroad. Is no doubt in your mind, or it conjures up this image of Midwest agriculture, probably lots of grain hoppers, and Illinois is very, Chicago is in Illinois, so you've got the plug-in ability with many other railroad networks. So it kind of opens up the door for almost anything to be written into that script.
All right, let's head to Eric in Arizona and hear what he had to say.
Hello, Ray. This is Eric from Arizona. I'm a longtime listener, first-time caller. The name of my railroad is the Gila Springs and Mesquite. And for people outside the Southwest, it is Gila Springs and Mesquite, but is also commonly known as the GS&M. How did I come up with the name for my railroad, the Gila Springs and Mesquite? For some of you, this might be a long and convoluted tale of useless facts involving dogs, ice cold 2 a.m. walks, Christmas vacation at the in-laws. I was thinking about my railroad at the time that had no name. I just knew it was going to be in the Southwest Arizona area. As I'm walking the dogs, I look over the fence in my in-laws' backyards. There's a street sign that says Gila Springs on it. And I'm just looking at that sign and go, how Southwest can something be than Gila Springs? Down the street from my in-laws' house is another street called Mesquite. So I just thought about it and go, nothing more Southwest than Gila Springs and Mesquite. In the end, the name for my railroad was as simple as taking my dogs for an ice-cold, rainy walk some Christmas evening, looking at a sign over the in-laws' fence and looking up and thinking, Gila Springs, that would be a great name for a railroad. Well, it looks like the dogs are done with their business. Thank you for the question, Ray. And as always, stay frosty, my friends.
You never know where inspiration is going to strike, do you, Chris?
Sometimes the answers are right in front of you, written on a sign. That's a great story. And, it follows what sounds like 2 locations or a location. And if we're going with the mesquite tree, it conjures up the image of the location where this railroad would run. And regardless of the inspiration, it's very, very plausible. And nice job.
All right, let's head to Syracuse and Joey and hear what Joey has to say.
Hey, Ray. This is Joey Busick from Syracuse, New York. The name of my freelance railroad is the Salt City Railroad. It's located in Syracuse, New York, which is nicknamed the Salt City, hence the name. In my timeline, back when Conrail was being split up, a group of now ex-Conrail employees based in Syracuse pooled their resources together and formed the Salt City Railroad, where they dedicate their efforts switching local industries. And there you have it. Have a good one.
Well, just look for a nickname of a city and you got a name.
There it is, location. And he's been posting a lot of stuff with his new Salt City concept. And wow, I feel like it's got a lot of runway ahead of it. He's really talented with what he's done. But again, a location, a very simple location, and because it doesn't have a direction or a second name in it, it makes you feel like it's a small local terminal railroad, which it is.
All right, let's hear from Trey Little.
My name is Trey Little, and I'm from Southeast Texas. My freelance is the Spindletop Railroad. It is named for the 1901 oil gusher town that put Beaumont and Southeast Texas on the map as an industrial powerhouse. I created the Spindletop Railroad as a way to stay connected to home no matter where I go.
Oh, very cool. Little touch of home in his freelance railroad.
Absolutely. Again, it's about location. It's not a specific location name, but it's a name that speaks to what's going on in the area where it runs. And by the way, I don't know if you noticed this, but at the Freelance Forum, there was a Spindletop business car in the office car special.
Oh, we'll have to go back. We've got some video of that we'll have to get out. That office car special was Very cool at the Freelance Forum. Very inspirational to me, but more on that later.
Absolutely.
Let's hear from David Honan.
This is Dave Honan from Snoqualmie, Washington. I grew up in Albany, New York, where early European influences were Dutch. For my entire childhood, I lived on a street named after the De Peyster family. So for over 30 years, I have intended to model a freelance line called the Peyster Valley Railroad. The location and type of railroad has evolved over time, but I'm indebted to previous show guests Matt Fricks and Isaac Fabris for helping sharpen the focus to being a short line operator of former D&H branch lines. Inspiration from my line story has been drawn from real-world state-level programs in New York and Washington, along with the numerous Northeastern short lines that have been successful with all ALCO and MLW locomotive rosters. My track plan is essentially complete, and I intend to begin bench work construction next year. Thanks for this engaging question, Ray, and I'm eager to hear others' freelance stories.
You know, it brings up a point what David just said about two guys who I consider kind of hardcore prototype guys in Matt Fricks and Isaac Fabris. But they really can kind of be your checks and balances to your freelance story too, can't they?
Oh, sure. And, you know, so many freelance modelers, prototype modelers can really enjoy and appreciate freelance. Who wants to read the same genre of book all the time, every time, right? And absolutely. And, you know, what he said about the inspiration of the locomotives in the era of the time, and you know, a lot of thought has gone into what his railroad's going to look like, and that I think just job well done.
All right, now we're heading to Texas and Galen Van Allen.
My name is Galen Van Allen, and I am now from Abilene, Texas. The name of my freelance railroad is going to be the Texas and Pacific Key City Subdivision. This is a modern take on the Texas and Pacific Railroad as if it never went away and is now a major Class 1 railroad. It will run from Abilene, Texas, which is known as the Key City, to Fort Worth, Texas, which is the line that was put in originally by the Texas and Pacific Railway. Really enjoy the podcast. Thanks for all you do, Ray.
Well, it's my pleasure, Galen, and thank you so much for submitting your answer. And it sounds like there's quite a bit of protest into his freelance story.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of folks out there who would protest the end of the Texas and Pacific, a great railroad from the pages of history. You know, the Texas and Pacific part certainly fits the, well, obviously it's a prototype fold into his name, but it also has location and direction. One thing he did that's interesting, and I've seen this, Ray, a lot of other folks have done it too, they'll incorporate into the railroad name like the word subdivision. You know, as a railroader, that means something very specific. So, you know, in a railroad, you have generally divisions, and as part of that division, the territory is divided into subdivisions. So I wonder a little bit when folks have the name subdivision in the name of the railroad, because it's implying that the whole railroad is just a little piece. You know, if it were the Texas and Pacific Key City Subdivision, that tells me that there's going to be another subdivision and another subdivision as part of a division of the railroad. So that's interesting, and I wonder if that was his intent with that.
We'll definitely have to follow Galen and see how his story develops and see what he's got planned with that whole subdivision concept.
I look forward to seeing what he does with the idea.
And wrapping up our responses to the question of the month, Sam Dickinson.
Hello all, Sam Dickinson from Evansville, Indiana. The name of my fictional railroad is the Grand Trunk Western. Now you're probably thinking, Sam, we asked you for the name of your fictional railroad, not the name of your prototype railroad. And you are correct. But what I model is a fictional railroad. I model an alternate history version of the Grand Trunk that was successful in merging the Milwaukee Road in 1985 and survived with its corporate identity intact instead of being absorbed into Canadian National. It's part of the genre that's regularly referred to as modern fallen flags. The reason I wanted to do this was because I grew up on the north side of Detroit, right alongside the Grand Trunk, fell in love with it, and felt sorry to see it disappear. Originally, my plan was to have the Grand Trunk absorb the Wisconsin Central, but during a brainstorming with a friend of mine, they told me about Grand Trunk's attempt to take the Milwaukee Road. I fell in love with the idea and have been running with it ever since. Hope this answers your question. Look forward to hearing the other answers from everyone, and I hope you all have a great day.
Well, thank you, Sam. Appreciate you submitting your answer to the question of the month. And does that slider start to move way towards freelance with Sam's answer? It's quite a protest and quite a what if story.
It is. It's certainly freelance. And at the freelance forum, there were some folks there that had modern Rio Grande and modern Missouri Pacific locomotives on display. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with taking a page from a story that ended at a certain date and then writing a freelance future for it. And I would have to agree with him. I was a little sorry to see the Grand Trunk Western disappear myself. So I'm glad to see somebody creating that what if it still existed or existed in the time period he's modeling.
Well, thank you to everyone who submitted their answers to the question of the month. Again, if you want to be a part of the fun of submitting your answer and being heard here on Around the Layout podcast, head to aroundthelayout.com/question. We post the question of the month there. Read the question, scroll down, you'll see the button, you hit record. You can do it on your computer, you can do it on your smartphone. You don't need any fancy recording equipment. Just hit record, answer the question of the month. You just might hear yourself heard on a Around the Layout podcast next month. Chris, want to thank you so much for coming by and telling us about freelance. And like I said earlier, we just laid a very light coat of primer on the freelance world. There's so much more to dive into, and we'll certainly be coming back with some additional freelance topics in the near future. But for now, thank you again for coming by and getting us started in the freelance world.
You're welcome, and thank you for the invite to talk about one of my favorite topics, Ray, at any time.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.